you don't have to make every single song about Satan, but I think that an alignment and an implicit understanding of alignment against the Christian God is non-negotiable.
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Chris Grigg.
And Mr. Grigg, what band do you play for, and how would you describe the music of that band?
I play in a band called Woe. Woe is probably best described as a form of very aggressive but still melodic black metal.
So, by the time people hear this podcast, Woe will be the fourth of 5 U.S. black metal bands that will have been on the podcast and in a few months. I'm curious, for you and for Woe, what does black metal mean?
Wow. Coming in with the heavy ones. So, black metal to me at this point in my life, I don't know if it means one single thing. I know, I can probably think of what it means in the context of Woe and in the context of what I want to listen to. And I've come to this place where I'm no longer really interested in telling other people, you're not black metal or that's not black metal. Even if I, of course I think those things. For me, it's a kind of nebulous thing, but it's black metal is primarily about darkness and rejection of control and authority. Be it we see it a lot about religion. The connection to black metal when it's done the way I want it to be done, it respects the anti-Christian mythology of Satan, either explicitly or implicitly, right? So I don't think there are some people who I know, they say if your songs are not about Satan, you're not playing black metal. As far as I'm concerned, you don't have to make every single song about Satan, but I think that an alignment and an implicit understanding of alignment against the Christian God is non-negotiable. Woe hasn't had songs really focused on that for a long time, but I still consider it a part of the identity of Woe as a black metal band. The new logo, the new version of the logo that we created for the new album, we added even more inverted crosses than in the past, representing, we've always had one, now we're up to 3. Give us a few more years, we'll probably, we'll be up to 5, maybe 6. But for me, it was very important that the inverted cross was not just included, but accentuated to sort of recommit to that position of rejection and aggression towards religious dogma. That for me, and you can certainly be against religious dogma without being a black metal band, but I think that aggressive hostility where the art is concerned is, for me it is important.
Gotcha. Would you say that black metal is mostly fast, or would you say that Woe is mostly fast?
Fast is always going to be relative to everything else you're listening to. For me, Woe is on the faster. Well, Woe is on getting towards I'd call it mid, moderately fast. There are bands, and I have some friends who will hear a song, one of my songs, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, you got a little speed going on there," and it's like, dude, this practically killed me to play this. What are you talking about? A little speed? Get the fuck out of here! This is killing me. I so it's all relative, right? Like you get a bands these days are playing up around 300 beats per minute, whereas I am, I hit 200. Well, I hit 185 on the new album, Glorious Depravity. The band where I play drums, we're up. We have some stuff where we're up around 220, and for me, that's like the fastest I think I'll ever play. So I've always thought of Woe. I've never thought of Woe as like a super speedy band. I think that Woe's speed comes across more. Woe comes across to me. It comes across as more aggression than like fast. But needless to say, I think black metal can surely be slower. There are whole genres of subgenres of black metal where they are slower. I think for me, it has the black metal sound has a lot more to do with the tones and the chords and the atmosphere it creates and the intent of the art than something like the speed at which they're playing.
Sure. And when we talk about the speed of the band, it should be noted that that is you playing all the instruments or most of the instruments on the albums. Is that correct?
On this new one, yeah. So on the first, I played everything. On the new one, I play everything except for cumulatively about 90 seconds worth of drums throughout the album. There's some spots where Lev, who's our drummer, we wanted him to play parts that he had written and contributed to, and his signature on those parts was important, very important to me. I like to think it was important to him too. And they're the kinds of things where to a listener, I don't think a listener will ever, unless they really know Lev's sonic fingerprint, I don't think anyone's going to listen and say, "Oh yeah, that's Lev." But I mean, of course, I can pick them out and I can point out the things and say, "Oh yeah, I don't know how to play that. What are you talking about?" But yes, otherwise, I did play everything.
So, if you don't mind, would you be able to tell us a little bit about the history of Woe and why you put the project together?
Sure. I started it some 16 years ago. I was in my early 20s, and I was somewhat, I don't know, I needed another creative outlet. I was a little frustrated with the whole band experience and really wanted to have something of my own that I could do at my pace and just work the way I wanted to work and explore some new ideas, some new sounds. So I started writing some black metal songs. One thing led to another, and I released a little demo that, it was received pretty well at the time. This was around, I guess, 2007. And then I continued writing songs. I released an album in 2008 called A Spell for the Death of Man. I did that one totally solo. It was a bit of a step up from the first one. The first one was very raw, very simple black metal. And then the first album was a bit more produced, a bit more put together, a little bit more dynamic. After that album was released sort of DIY and on a small label. I started getting offers to play some shows and thought, seems like a thing to try. So I put together a band, and with the band we started playing, did some little regional tours. I was in Philadelphia at the time. And then we recorded another album, did some more touring. We did 2 albums with Candlelight Records before they were sold to Spine Farm. And then one thing led to another, and the lineup changed a little bit. I moved to New York about 2011. And since then, I've released 3 more albums. So there was, I guess, the first in 2008, the second around 2010, the third sometime around 2013, I guess. The fourth, Hope Attrition, was like 6 or 7 years ago at this point, followed by an EP, and then Legacies of Frailty most recently on Friday the 29th, I guess, of September, which was a week ago today.
So we'll speak about Legacies of Frailty more in more depth in a little bit. I'm curious, how does a Woe song start?
Always with guitar. I always start by just playing around with riffs. Sometimes, occasionally, I will have a tone or a mood in mind, and I will write riffs in that try to capture that mood, or I'll have a particular band and I'll think like, I wonder how they're doing it. And I'll try to just do my take on an over riff, or for example, or an Emperor riff or something like that. And naturally, once I'm there, it always develops, and then it slowly turns into a Woe riff. But it's always just me and my guitar. I tend to write multiple instruments kind of concurrently, right? So I'll jump from guitar 1 to guitar 2 to drums, back to guitar 1, back to drums, back to guitar 2, add an overdub, back to drums, back to guitar 1, and things like that. So I'm kind of thinking about all of the instruments at this, I mean, not technically at the same time, but like in quick succession sometimes, and I'll bounce between them, and a decision made on one instrument will have an influence on the others. And, one riff will hint at the riff that comes after it. And sometimes the riff that comes after it makes me rethink the first one. And then it's just sort of, through just repeat that process for many months until I hate myself. And then I come around to it, and eventually I like it.
Do you have your own home studio, or do you record everything on a DAW?
I do it through the computer.
Okay.
I do it through the computer. So I have quite a bit of recording equipment. Quite a bit. I've started the downside.
I should mention, you recorded, in addition to recording this album, you also recorded the Glorious Depravity album.
That's right. Yeah. So that one I recorded, and that was all with my gear. This one was a little different because the drums were done in a studio. So we recorded the drums at a place called Red Planet Recording, which was where I did the entire first Woe album 15 years ago. So I went back to the same studio with the same producer, the same engineer. I had just finished mixing an album for one of my bandmates, and they recorded it there, and the drums sounded phenomenal. And so I decided to go back there, kind of back to where it all started. And then, but what made this one different is I did a lot more of it in the box. So I'm gonna upset some guitar amp purist here, but I used digital amps, and I was able to record the entire thing at home. I recorded the vocals here. Yeah, recorded the vocals here in my apartment, and mixed the entire thing in the box without using any analog gear. So it was a different experience, but I'm extremely happy with the outcome.
Back to your songwriting. So when you're saying you're jumping back and forth between guitars and drums, are you programming the drums?
Oh, sure. Yes. I should have clarified that. Yes. Yeah. So when I write, I program the drums, and so as I'm writing, I program the drums, and it's a lot of, like copying, pasting beats and things, and then I'll tweak things. I tend to, as a song develops, everything starts off very crude, but then by the time a song is reaching its, a more polished point, I'll get pretty extreme with some of the drum programming, where I'll start thinking about what's the right fill that I want to hear here. Should it be going to the hi-hat or the ride cymbal? Getting pretty in the weeds with it, which doesn't always mean that the finished recording will be exactly the same, but it does certainly have an influence on, at least when I'm playing the drums, on what's recorded. And very often subtle details will, for me, if I listen to a demo enough, subtle details in the drum programming will become really part of the written music of the song, so to speak, the understood music of the song. So the programming is somewhere, a lot of the details in the drum programming become very important to me.
Do you update your bandmates? And I should say, even though you handle most of the instrumentation on the albums, you have a live lineup. Do you update them as you're working, or do they hear the songs when they're finished?
So that's a great question. So, I want to just clarify, I guess. I still see everyone as in the band, not so much, really not just live band. The guys who are in Woe, we've had the same lineup for quite a while now, and we did Hope Attrition together. We did the EP of Island Dread the year after that, and we've toured quite a bit and we've played a lot. And as far as I am concerned, even though they were not on the album, they are still very much in the band. So I almost see it as more of a collective than anything else, where members can kind of come and go. And Woe, to a certain extent, has always been that way. In the early days, we had a rotating live lineup, and we would play live with anywhere from 1 to 3 guitarists, depending on who was available. So this is, kind of in some ways business as usual. I wound up playing on the album in many ways because of necessity. So, so it's a fluid dynamic circumstance arrangement. In terms of what do I tell them? Yeah, I try to be pretty open with all of my demos. I've been told I can be a little intense, a little much when it comes to some of this stuff. I'm a compulsive tinkerer and editor, and I tend to be dissatisfied with my own work for a while. So it's, if you looked at my folder with my versions of demos, you'll see dozens of versions of a song, and you'll see a song. They're always numbered based on how many song attempts I've done for the album. So you'll go into like song 6, and you'll see they're all time stamped. They're all with dates on them, and you'll see like 30, 40 files, and eventually you'll reach a point where it will be like song 6, May 1st, final. Song 6, May 1st, final B. Song 6, May 1st, final C. Song 6, May 2nd, final D. And just like I try not to really brutalize them with updates, because they don't always appreciate that, because it's really annoying, and there's nothing really actionable for them to do anyway. But I still, I give them access to shared folders. I point out when there's new stuff in there. Jeszek, who he's been part of Woe since the beginning, and he's played every instrument in Woe at one point or another. And he was my co-producer on this album. He likes to hear demos. I can send him a work in progress, and he will listen to it, and he'll send me written notes on what he thinks needs to happen, or things he likes and doesn't like. So, everybody kind of works within the time and the time they have available and want to contribute, and I try to respect their needs.
And so for things like the synth parts that are on this latest album, do you have those in mind as you're writing? Or do you pre-plan like wanting to have like a more atmospheric section, or does it come up pretty organically? Do you reach a point where like, well, it would be cool to have an atmospheric section here, or it makes sense to have a synth part here?
It's always organic. The synth on this album was honestly a real surprise. I had an idea that I wanted to do it, and I have never programmed synth before. I knew that I wanted to do it. I had a sense. I had a sense of some things. I had a sense that I wanted the the choir, the real choir sounding synth parts in certain black metal sections to evoke a very classic, dramatic black metal, just like black metal feel. So for certain parts, they didn't require a ton of thought. It was really like, oh, I can hear these riffs. This is a cool part. Sonically, there's a little gap in the space. I can add in a synth choir here and really fill it out, really add to some drama. And you hear that in a lot of the songs, really heavily in the first track and in the last, and really all over the place. But then some of the others, those were a lot of experimentation where I used them to accomplish different effects, like kind of emotional or dramatic effects. So there are certain spots where I use a kind of distant, delicate sounding synth to evoke the sense of, a far off voice, or a far off sad melody. Or I use horns in a lot of sections to for different reasons, but it's usually something very literal, where it's, in the fifth track there are horns, and the lyrics and then the verse immediately after remark far off trumpets blare. And so I find that the synth offered a level of melodic and thematic I don't know, palette that just let me kind of like extend and elaborate on certain ideas. And then I guess the real one I'm missing, and that you probably are curious about, the long synth break in the last song. That was actually Lev's idea. I had made a commitment to myself that I didn't want the synth to really be the focal point. The synth was always there. Maybe I would compromise and say, like, okay, this spot, the riff is doing a thing. I can use the synth to build on this, and it'll be the focus. It'll be the lead. The synth break in that song was very much Lev, which is very strange because Lev is the most anti-synth metal purist I've ever met, and he was the one who suggested it, and I'm really glad he did.
So as you mentioned, Legacies of Frailty was released at the end of September through Vendetta Records. How do you compare Legacies to your previous albums? What would you say makes this one different besides the synth parts?
So I think that there are a few things. This is by far the most focused and deliberate of all of them. Deliberate in the sense that there was nothing really accidental. There was nothing that I hadn't considered in some capacity. And on previous albums, which isn't to say that previous albums were unconsidered, but there were things on previous albums where sometimes I'd think, oh, it's good enough, or, oh, it's just a bridge riff, it's fine, or, it's fine. That's just the way the song came out. We're going to go with it. It's fine. With this one, it was very, very focused and obsessive, and I wanted to come out sounding like this and this riff doesn't capture the feeling I'm looking for, or this vocal take isn't doing it for me, so I'm just gonna do it the fuck again. So that was it. The level of detail and attention that went into everything was a lot higher. The sort of single-mindedness that I took to a lot of the songs and the riffs was amplified. I mean, on Hope Attrition, I think there's a real big difference between Hope Attrition and Withdrawal, the album that came before it. And that Hope Attrition really turned up the black metal. I recommitted to it. Legacies of Frailty is even more so. I very deliberately purged influences that I thought didn't achieve my vision of black metal that I had for this album. And which meant that I was discarding riffs that were good riffs because they simply didn't fit. They didn't drop into the schema that I had. They did not amplify the feeling and the message that I was trying to get across at any given time. And obviously, you know, there's some variation between the songs. The songs don't all sound like the same song over and over again. And there, you know, I think that we could say the pendulum swings between aggressive and melodic on this album. And some songs are more on one side, some are more on the other. But in general, it is where song structures and where riffs are concerned, from my perspective, it's the most narrowly scoped and, you know, single-minded, which is funny because the addition of synth at the same time turns it into probably the most ambitious and has more experimental pieces on it than any album since the second, where, you know, it's this foundation of primitive, narrow-minded, some would say repetitive, exhausting black metal with these occasionally delicate sounds over top of them, with leitmotifs that appear and disappear, with, you know, lyrics that call out to the vocals, with a narrative arc, you know, starting from beginning to end. So in a lot of ways, it's my most primitive and simple and narrow-minded, but also my most ambitious and dynamic, and the has elements on it that I was more, not nervous, but they felt like more of a departure than anything I had done in a long time. So, you know, on top of that, it's, of course, I think it's the fastest. It's the most riffy. I am taking my guitar playing much more seriously than I ever did before, and I wanted a riffs album. It is a riffs album. And, you know, I think that I'm proud of all the Woe albums. They all have riffs that I like quite a bit, but this one I set out to really step everything up. So I think this is a very long rambling answer. I'm sorry, but I think that overall it's, you know, I think it's the most extreme of all of them in really every way, and I'm quite proud of that.
You mentioned a narrative arc. Is this a concept album?
Yes.
Do you want to speak a little bit of what the concept is?
Yeah, sure. So Legacies of Frailty, it explores the idea of civilization. I mean, it sounds so dramatic, but it explores the idea of civilization's battle with and failure to address long-standing. It deals with our civilization's inability to really defeat certain regressive ideas or our own regressive nature. It's very much an album about the conflict between progress and the forces that try to kind of pull us backwards. It's never explicitly stated what that means, and I think like for me, I wrote it thinking very much about the rise of nationalism and the rise of extremism, the rise of like a certain kind of like crude populism that tries to tap into a general sense of discontent and weaponizes people's fear and sense of uncertainty and senses of insecurity, and it weaponizes them against the civilization itself. So it starts sort of chronologically with this thing awakening, this thing that we thought was long defeated, and it returns, and we see that people don't fight it. There are people who embrace it, and there are people who see it as an opportunity to fill the holes in their own emptiness and dissatisfaction with life. We then see that turning into a mob where people embrace the violence and conflict, and they start to define themselves by it. And we see that this superficial sense of, we had this pride and this sense of, we're evolved and we're moving forward, and then we're confronted with the reality that inside so many of our friends and families and neighbors and ourselves, there's this primitive cruelty just waiting to be exploited. We then talk about the realities of war that comes as a result of it, very much written thinking about Ukraine and the Russian terrorist aggression against them. It then moves into a sense of defeat, a sense of, we all recognize that it's a problem, but no one can do anything about it. This sort of inertia that we see in the slow song. And then we finally end by looking at the future. So far beyond the fracture of the sky, we look towards the future and we ask, what will there be to inherit? And we talk about the world that will be left as a result of this. And it asks that question, and it describes a world no child dares explore, thinking about the next generation and just what we've left for them.
So you talked about the recording of the album and how most of it was done in the box, so to speak, meaning amp plugins and mastering plugins as well, right?
Mixing plugins. I didn't master it. It's the one thing I didn't do. I should clarify. I used the guitars. The rhythm guitars were all done with a Fractal FM9, so it's hardware. It's a hardware digital amplifier device. So it's not quite plugins. Definitely not tube amps and microphones.
Gotcha. And the reason you recorded this way is just for practicality?
Yeah. It's, doing everything myself meant a lot of work. Doing everything myself under the best case scenario was a lot of work. Doing everything, knowing the amount of detail, the attention to detail that I wanted was just, it was a very large undertaking. There are 4 rhythm guitars playing at all times. There are 2 per channel. On top of that, there are sections with, 2-3 lead overdubs. So just guitars alone was a very, very high effort. So doing this with, I made an investment in the hardware that meant that I could, and the Fractal FM9 is heard on a lot of albums. It's heard on, Fractal hardware is heard on a hell of a lot of metal albums these days. I think a lot of bands don't want to talk about it, but it's the truth.
I just spoke to Scott Burns, and he put out a book, and he kind of alludes to it, but a lot of bands were getting help.
Yep.
What I mean?
Yep.
Whether we know it or not, and whether they want to admit it or not.
Yep.
I think people are a little bit naive as to how these albums are recorded, but
yes,
there's always been a lot of help in the studio.
Yeah. So, but and I have, if I was to, it's funny because some of the amps that I used, like some of the amps that came out of this digital hardware, I own, or my bandmates own, and I have, the same microphones, the same preamps, the same hardware, all of the same stuff, that if I was to go into a studio, they would probably, there's a good chance they'd be using all the same stuff. So I could have gone to my studio space and recorded with the hardware. but with like the real deal with microphones and everything. But doing it at home meant that I could, I cut down on travel time. I cut down on ear fatigue. I was able to reamp and fine tune tones. I was able to record for an hour or two at a time and then stop. So it just let me, I have a full-time job. I have a wife. I have a young daughter. It allowed me to have a little more flexibility without having to sacrifice quality, without having to, go drive and record or pay someone to sit in their studio and use their gear if I wanted a more comfortable space. So it let me be the obsessive maniac that I really wanted to be when it came to this recording.
And as we mentioned, you also engineered the Glorious Depravity album.
I did.
Have you always wanted to be an engineer?
I did.
Or
yeah.
Is it just do you just like to handle the recording for your own bands?
No, I recorded for many years. When I was in Philadelphia, I had a studio, and I had quite a bit of equipment, and I recorded a lot of bands for a couple years there. It's a thing I always wanted to do from the time I was a very, very young child. I've always loved technology. I've always loved sound and music, and I've always wanted to put this all together. And yeah, so I wanted to record from the time I was very young. I stopped when I moved to New York. I stopped recording quite as much just because I found that recording professionally took a lot of the fun out of the process. And I really just wasn't enjoying it the way I used to, especially when you're recording other bands and you don't know what the circumstances are going to be. So I miss it. I really do miss it. There are a lot of things that every now and then I wonder what would have happened if I had kept pursuing it, but I still have most of my equipment. I'm still able to record, I can still record a drum set. I can still, if I need, if someone demanded it, I could, like I was just saying, I could record damn good sounding guitars. But, it's just not where I want to invest my time these days.
So this was a question I wanted to ask Scott Burns, but we didn't get around to it. But the level of clarity in modern productions is startling for someone like me who got into this stuff in the 90s, and you always kind of had to guess what the drummer was playing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why is it? Is it because bands aren't recording to tape anymore? Is it because most of it is being done digitally? Is it triggers?
I think it's probably all of those things. I think it's all of those things, but I also think that it's just, it's also the techniques have changed a lot. We've as metal has aged and as the people playing and recording it have aged, the techniques for how you capture these sounds have grown and changed. I think as a result of the internet, especially YouTube, knowledge is shared at a really, in a faster and more complete way than it was when you and I were kids, where, you see kids who are 16, 17 years old playing Nile songs on drums and guitar, see kids, you see outright children playing insane pro level metal that when we were kids, there were like 2-3 people alive who could do those things. And YouTube has done this. So I think that, the ability for people to quickly refine and compare and share techniques has evolved to a point where, it's some of these things are no longer secrets. And then, past that, digital recording means that there's no reason that you really have to accept anything but the best, right? So you can take, you can take someone who's not totally prepared to record, and if you're willing to spend the time, you can leave with a recording that sounds like they're, the best drummer you've ever heard. So, and I'm speaking from experience here.
Or maybe your drummer's name is MIDI.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe your drummer's name is MIDI. Some of and then you have things like the fractal hardware and digital amps, where now anyone, I mean, even the plugins, man, like there are a lot of albums that we all listen to these days where the guitars are straight up VSTs and it sounds awesome. And the technology isn't done yet. It's not done. It's going to keep getting better. So, I think that we've just reached a place where, we're in a world now where the technology is better, the skills are better, and people don't really have limits on that they used to, when they were bound by what their budget was, what the nearby room was, what the engineer was, and, etc.
I mean, it's funny, 30 years ago, the recording budget of a death metal album, including a lot of the classics or the albums that we think of as classics, was $5,000.
Wow.
And that was 30 years ago. And, record labels are making even less money now. So I can't imagine what a recording budget would be. And even though bands have less money to go around, the recordings are so good. Just all you really need is somebody with, the engineering expertise and, the ability to, the gear that you talked about, the Fractal and, the plugins. I'm sure I'm not the cheap plugins that, someone like me uses to just goof off on GarageBand, but after that initial investment, I'm sure your budget is a lot lower than what a band going into the studio would have to pay.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think, yeah, it's, my overall costs were, yeah, of course they were quite a bit less. I mean, it cost me a lot less to make this album than the one before it. I think it's, the one before it has some things that I would say objectively sound quite a bit better. And there are some things on this one that I simply, whether they sound better, I prefer them on this one. But cost wise, I spent twice as much on the last album. No, I don't know if it sounds twice as much better, although not to disparage anybody. It's just, I think the last album sounded great. It's just the reality of where the technology is. But at the same time, I think there are going to be people who hear the new album and they're going to say oh, it's too clean or it's too this. And, I miss when it was raw and miss this and that. Jeszek, co-producer, told me it's too clean, make it sound shittier, make it raw. And, we butted heads about that still, but it's a really interesting topic. And yeah, it's a really interesting topic.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up on, old Immolation albums were on cassette, by the way.
Nice.
So, they were already super hissy to start with. And then you could barely tell what the band was doing. And of course the cassette would jam. And so you'd only be able to listen to the first two songs and the last two songs. And, years later when I checked out Immolation again, it was oh, these dudes are actually pretty awesome.
That's
so I'm not, the people who complain, oh, it's too overproduced. They were not around in the 90s. They don't know what a thrill it is to hear every cymbal fill and every kick drum. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, actually hear what they're playing. But at the same time, I listen to a lot of raw black metal. I don't listen to I listen to a lot of raw black metal. I listen to a lot of old black metal. I listen to music that sounds like people in a room being maniacs. And I don't really like things that are, I like a lot of different things, but I'm not usually drawn to, if I'm drawn to something because of the way it sounds, it's rarely because it sounds produced. And I think that, you listen to those old recordings, and to me, there is something very magical about the fact that these are just some dudes in a room. These are just some guys in a room, and they could they were doing this, and you didn't have to wonder, am I listening to people or computers?
Right. Yeah.
If I go to see these guys, like, is it going to be real? And there is a lot to be said for that. And I think that's, there were fewer bands. Metal was more underground, a smaller audience to begin with, but there were simply fewer bands because there were fewer people who could play at that level, especially pre-internet, pre-YouTube, the same stuff we were talking about with recording and, like there's no YouTube teaching people how to do these things. I took a drum lesson with John Longstreth last year.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, he's amazing. And we were talking about this heel toe kick drum technique, and he remarked at one point, he's like, yeah, he's like, everybody's doing it now, but early on it was me and Hellhammer. It's just like holy shit. And you hear John Longstreth on his, when he started doing it, and like he essentially invented it. He and Hellhammer seemed to discover it at the same time, and it's awesome. It's awesome, and it's kind of never going to come back. So, or if it comes back, it's bands that make a point of telling you. So, I think there's a lot to be said for that. Natural quality to a lot of the stuff.
So you mentioned that you didn't handle the mastering of the album. Do you want to say anything about the gentleman who did the mastering?
Yeah, so it was mastered by V Santora from Dark Fortress, is the band that I've always known him the most for. I got into Dark Fortress when I was like 20 or something like that. So it was wild to have him work on my album. He's also the guitarist in Triptychon, and he plays live with Celtic Frost these days. Yeah, so I asked him to master it because of his work on with Thy Darkened Shade, who are a really wild, hyper technical, very produced black metal band from Greece. And he mixed and mastered most, if not all, of their albums, at least two of them. And it sounds incredible. And I wanted to work with him because I wanted a kind of like a different sensibility from the mastering person. You know, I'm a very enthusiastic amateur when it comes to mixing, and I wanted to see what would happen if I gave that to a real pro who comes at things from a very, very European, extreme metal perspective. Yeah, he did an amazing job. He was very patient with me. The mix that I first gave him sounded like trash, and he was very patient with me as I as he started handing me masters, and I was like, yeah, this isn't going to work. This mix sucks. And I had to, he gave me some advice on specific, little changes to make that would fix things. And he was very patient, and we came away with some great results.
You mentioned a more European perspective or a more European aesthetic. What would you say Viv Centura brought to the sound of Woe, or the sound of the finished album?
I mean, I think he just, the stuff that he does tends to be very big and loud and polished and clear. And I think my mix was approaching that, but I think that he pushed it more in that direction. So, I think he made sure that the guitars all popped out and the drums hit as hard as they could. And, he made it sound finished.
So at the time that we're having this conversation, the album has been out for a week. You mentioned family responsibilities. Are you going to get a chance to tour or play shows before the end of the year?
Before the end of the year, I'm not sure. We're definitely, well, nothing's ever definite. We have plans to go to Europe next year. We have talked about, we're going to start rehearsing again we're going to start rehearsing again in preparation for that. I think it's likely that, if we're all here and we're all ready and we want to play the songs, I think it's very likely that we'll wind up doing some shows in the US. Whether that happens at the end of this year or the start of next year, I can't really say for sure. The year is, time is ticking, so clock is ticking rather. So yeah, so I can't say for sure, but we will. My wife is extremely supportive of all of my music. She acts as, she won't let me credit her. She doesn't like attention, but she acts in many ways as a creative director, critiquing and advising on, conceptual things and calling out things that, if she gets a sense that I'm, missing something or something could be better, she's always very quick to call it out. So, she deserves a lot more credit than she allows me to give her, but she is an extremely talented artist. And, so she wants to make sure that the album is supported in a way that reflects the care and effort that went into it.
That's great.
She rules.
So, Legacies of Frailty is out now through Vendetta Records. Chris, please tell people how they can order the album. What's the best way to get it?
Sure. So you can get it, you can listen to it through the streaming service of your choice. It's available through a new emerging service that I've actually created called AmpWall. So you can get it through woeandholy.ampwall.com. I have merch up there right now and expanding that into digital. You can also find it on Bandcamp, of course, woeandholy.bandcamp.com. You can also get it, if you're in outside of the United States, you can get it directly from Vendetta. They have a Big Cartel page that you can find pretty easily, as well as a Bandcamp page. It's also carried by a number of metal distributors throughout the world.
Do you want to say anything about the vinyl versions that Vendetta is putting out?
Yeah, we did, the black, and then there are two others. There's a gold and a flame, which is like a semi-transparent, translucent, like red and orange. I haven't seen them in person yet. They're on their way here to me. They're supposed to arrive on the 8th, which is 3 days from now. So yeah, the pictures I've seen, they look pretty nice. And, I'm excited to get my hands on them and feeling mildly anxious about the very large backlog of orders that I have to pack up and send out. But yeah, I think the two colors are sold out. We have about 100 black vinyl left, maybe something like that, maybe less. So if you're listening and you like vinyl, please buy records from me. I need to get these out of my apartment. Thank you.
And if people want to follow Woe online, what's the best way to do that?
So you can follow us on is our official website, woeunholy.com. I post some little things up there occasionally. You can also follow us on Instagram through Woe Unholy. That's where I've kicked most of my social media habits, except for that one. We are on Facebook, mostly just the same things that you'll find on Instagram. I'm personally on Twitter, where I post, a fair amount of Woe things, as well as, I write a lot about the service that I'm building, Ampwall. So you can find me at Subvert All Media.
Well, tell me a little bit more about Ampwall.
Sure.
Is this going to be like just tell me about Ampwall.
Sure.
This is the first time hearing about it, actually.
Yeah. So, it's funny. This is the first interview I've done where I've talked about it. So I announced it. We're not doing a big push. We're not doing a big marketing push for it right now. So Ampwall is a service. I'm a software engineer, and Ampwall is a service platform I've been building over the last year. Think of it as, we're targeting it as Bandcamp, but cheaper and better. So it's, a lot of the features you find on Bandcamp, digital audio sales with no DRM, merchandise sales, but it's, artist owned and operated, built by me. And then I have a co-founder who's joining up. And yeah, we were building this quietly. I had just started accepting merchandise orders last week as part of my very, very quiet rollout plan, just to make sure that everything works. But we decided to announce it last Friday as a result of the announcement of Bandcamp's Epic Games selling Bandcamp. So Bandcamp, you may know, was sold to a company called Songtradr, which is a music licensing company that no one really knows anything about. There's a lot of anxiety out there. People are very upset about what this means for the future of independent music. So I wanted to sort of kind of enter that conversation and say, I'm working on an alternative. I think it's important that there should be an alternative that is truly artist owned, where, the people who are owning it and who own, the equity in the company and build it are themselves independent musicians who are putting their own work into it and on the line. So right now we are not accepting public signups yet. We're still in the early days, but I'm working on it full time now. And there's a mailing list you can sign up for if you go to ampwall.com, ampwall.com. So you can sign up for the mailing list there, and we'll have some news hopefully pretty soon. You can also check out Woe's page there. I'm not selling digital audio yet, just merchandise right now. But it's, it's going to start being pretty similar to Bandcamp in a lot of ways. But I have some ideas that I think are pretty ambitious for things that I've always wanted to see from Bandcamp that they never did. So I'm going to do them. The response to my announcement on Friday was tremendous and really blew me away. And things are now moving a little bit faster than they were before. So it's just gonna, that's all.
No, I think what we're all looking for is a more true and Cavalt alternative to Bandcamp, right?
Yeah. So I mean, frankly, I think we just need any alternative. I think that it's, they've done Bandcamp has been a crucial part of independent music for a very long time. And, it's sustained us as the Spotifys of the world, and algorithms have taken over, and it's been amazing. But fundamentally, there's something doesn't sit right with me knowing that there is one company that holds all the power, and that we, independent music, the whole world of independent music, is really at the mercy of the whims of people who are not musicians making business decisions that affect independent music. So I think it's important that there are alternatives. I think Ampwall is probably going to be the first that is, outright, setting that goal. But I think there will be, I'm sure there will be others.
Yeah. And I think what you're doing is very exciting, and hopefully we can have you back on in a few months to talk about it again.
Would love to.
One last thing before I let you go. We mentioned Glorious Depravity a few times, and I had Doug come on to speak about the album when it was released. What is the status of that band now?
We are finishing demos for the second album. We just Tuesday night, 2 nights ago, we just finished what were the last of the full band demos, and now we're going to start polishing up all of our parts individually, and hopefully, man, hopefully recording by the end of the year. Yeah, we have new stuff. It's brutal. It's awesome.
Very cool. So you've been very generous with your time, but is there anything else you want to say?
No, man, Adrian, I really appreciate your time here. Really great, insightful questions, and I really appreciate the thought that you put into it, and you taking the time and the interest in me and in Woe, and supporting everything that I and Doug and my friends and the whole scene are doing. It's really important. I really appreciate it.
I do have one last thing I want to bring up. As I was doing the research, I found out that you covered a Dawn song. I've been sneaking Dawn songs onto mixtapes for like 25 years now. I was stoked to hear that. Is that something that you guys plan to play live?
We played it a bit, yeah, we played it a little bit. I don't think we're gonna play it anymore. It's a very long song.
Yes,
It's very, very long. And, and I love it for its intensity. People who don't like Dawn, tend to say that they're, kind of like repetitive and it's monotonous and one note and, not very dynamic, which is a thing that a lot of people have said about Woe for a long time, where it's just like it's like all blast beats, it doesn't stop, it's exhausting. And to me, that's a feature, not a bug. Like I like Dawn because it's just nonstop, unrelenting, and it's aggressive, but it's still melodic, and it's still memorable. And you might notice, the new Woe album, I deliberately turned up the Dawn on it in a big way. So, I covering that song was a real dream for me. But and we did play it a bunch, but it's so damn long, man. It's like 25% of our set when we play it. It's like we got a 40-minute set. It's a 10-minute song. We can. It's just it's hard to justify when people we want to play the originals. So I'm not going to say we'll never play it again, but it's probably probably not going to be a thing we're pursuing.
Maybe for like a festival or something like that, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Or you know what, man, if we play Sweden and Henke comes out and he wants to do vocals, we'll play the fuck out of that song, man.
Awesome.
So
yeah, that's a great place to leave off. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. This was fun.